Welcome to your key discovery point. I am Brett Burney from Next Point, joined by Doug Austin of eDiscovery today. Doug, several months ago, we discussed a case, National Pension Fund versus Carvana, because it seemed like the defendants were trying to avoid producing hyperlinked files. And then there was some discussion about whether they could produce linked files at the time the message was sent or the current version of that linked file. So the case is back. It's rearing its head again, not necessarily an ugly head yet. There's an interesting approach here by the judge telling the plaintiffs to select 250 responsive emails with hyperlinked attachments. And the defendant has to then go out and search for those and produce them with the documents. Just kind of a really interesting little twist here to this case.
Yeah, and I think a little backstory is appropriate here because, as you can see, I've got the link to the previous ruling there,
Mm-hmm.
and in that ruling, Judge Boyle, Arizona Magistrate Judge John Boyle, stated pretty strongly that the court will not excuse defendants from any efforts to produce contemporaneous hyperlinked documents outright simply because they elected to use a suite of cloud-based web applications that would make that process difficult. So he stated that and ordered the defendants to do collection for two custodians picked by the plaintiff. So then fast forward a few months, and turns out, at least according to the defendants, discovery of contemporaneous hyperlinked documents is hard and expensive. And, again, they were using, this was based on the plaintiff's request for them to use the tool, Metaspike's tool, Forensic Email Collector, FEC.
Right.
And that paragraph that starts with to counter is where defendants described exactly what their challenges were with using FEC and doing this collection. And they basically indicated that they were only able to collect 0.4% of top-level executive hyperlinked documents modified within 24 hours of Google Vault. Out of 112,000 plus total emails, they're only able to capture 7,500 plus responsive emails with hyperlinks. They basically said they spent 1,170 hours and over $200,000 for the two custodians, which was basically a $425 per document price tag for using FEC, which is quote unquote countered 5 times more expensive than using traditional discovery techniques. So before I get into the what the judge ruled, it probably would be interesting to scroll down to the comments because just yesterday, when we're recording this, somebody who is an experienced eDiscovery professional that I happen to know, even though his the name didn't come out exactly.
Profound. Okay.
and he actually reached out to me and he says he's not sure why I didn't capture his name. So I'm not going to mention him in case he doesn't want to be mentioned.
Right.
But he in essence called BS on what the defendant said in terms of the cost for doing this. And basically said it's a much more straightforward process than they made it seem. And so he essentially said, well, the people operating the tools are either legitimately unaware of how to do it, or they're lying and trying to pull a fast one on the court. I don't know. And one of the things that I think is interesting is the dialogue continues in terms of just how easy or difficult it is to collect hyperlinked files, especially contemporaneous hyperlinked files. This person says it's a lot easier than the defendants make it out to be. Regardless, ultimately, based on what the defendants had said, plaintiffs then said, "Hey, well, we'll take 1,000 responsive emails from all 25 custodians that for defendants to run through FEC to find the most contemporaneous version of hyperlinked attachments."
Right.
So Judge Boyle then said, "Hey, we're going to strike a fine balance between burden and benefit and say that plaintiffs can select 250 responsive emails that defendants can run through FEC. It's also notable that he said, with regards to everything else, he said, while the order doesn't limit or extinguish defendant's obligation, He said defendants will provide the most contemporaneous version of all hyperlinked attachments from responsive parent emails using traditional ESI discovery techniques, which
Mm,
essentially meant just using Google Vault, no FVC or script, which of course we
right.
think is probably a lot more difficult. So that's interesting. He also ruled on the plaintiff's request to do what's kind of known as a reverse search, which is you find files in Google Vault and you basically then go and find corresponding emails if they exist. And he again limited to what they could do there, basically saying, "Hey, you can select 200 documents that the defendants will attempt to locate a parent email for." And basically said that, hey, that limited level of search should be proportional to the plaintiff's needs of knowing who knew what and when, but won't be unduly burdensome for defendants. So this is yet another case where ultimately it's come down to the compromise of select a certain number and agree on that number as opposed to the select all hyperlink files or contemporaneous
Right.
hyperlink files or none or what have you. This is, I mean, just like even though Judge Parker ruled against the plaintiffs in Nichols v. Noom, she did say they could request a certain number. Ultimately, the In re Uber case with Judge Cisneros came to a requesting a certain number. And, now this is another one where we're at that point. So it seems as though right now we're going to see probably more instances where that will be kind of where the courts ultimately come down on is, hey, let's really figure out the most important ones and focus
Right.
the level of effort of there to make it more proportional.
I do appreciate the fact that the defendants here did give some specific numbers, right? And how many
I do.
emails, like they talked about how many hours, they calculated how much per document. And the reason that I'm saying I appreciate that is because so often we find in some of these arguments that they're just like, Judge, this is too hard.
Hmm.
And then that's it,
Right.
right? That like they stop there. But time and time again, we've heard judges come back, Doug, to say, no, that's not enough. Like we need some more quantifiable, number calculations so that we can make a better decision on that. That
Hmm.
said, this typically to me sort of reveals what I always call the difference between the strategy involved with litigation and the technicalities. To your point, I call it the dazed and confused comment down here just because they say dazed profound. But technically it sounds like and even before this comment here, I felt okay. Well, technically, I believe that this is possible, and it's not going to be an easy walk, but it is possible to retrieve these
Hmm.
things that they're being requested.
Right.
But I'm also a realist in the sense, Doug, that there is a strategy involved here that the defendants, I would assume, don't necessarily want to say that it's easy to do. So they're going to put forth some kind of an argument to at least, maybe bolster their position, like this is going to cost a little bit extra, take some extra time, which I don't disagree with. It just, I've been involved in enough of these that sometimes you make sure the numbers sort of favor you just a little bit more. But I do just want to give recognition that they did a good job here, I thought, of at least, providing some of these calculations. Because if you are going to put forth that strategic type of an argument there, you need to make sure that it is backed up in this way.
Right. And I will say that I think this is the first case where we've seen a party really provide that level of metrics, or at least that we've
Right.
seen them in a ruling. And I've got to say that I'm assuming they're providing this in some sort of declaration or court filing or what have you,
Right.
where
Right.
I don't think that's, there I think the idea of, well, hey, we're going to fudge these numbers and put it into an actual court filing, probably not the best idea. So I
Right. Right.
legitimately believe that this is what they experienced. Whether that
True.
was because they
Yes.
didn't know how to use the tool, whether it was because maybe their Google Vault environment was maybe in a manner where it was difficult to use FEC, because that could be a
Sure.
possibility too.
Yes.
It's hard to
Yes.
say, but definitely I think the continued debate on just how easy or difficult this is and what can be done, and also the continued evolution of the source solutions in terms of how they'll make it easier, I think is going to be the debate and discussion we continue with for quite a while to come.
I also give props to Judge Boyle here as well, because as he says right here, the court finds that the best way to proceed on this issue is to strike a fine balance between burden and benefit. And I think Judge Boyle does a good job here of at least trying to weigh both of those sides there, right? Because it's this discussion part that I see. We know ultimately this is an issue, a challenge that will continue to get resolved, just like all the other challenges that we've seen over the decades with eDiscovery. But it is so important to have the judges to be able to kind of go through and navigate that balance between burden and benefit. And I think Judge Boyle does a really good job on that.
Indeed. And I will just kind of provide a little teaser with regard to the State
good.
of the Industry report. Is one of the questions again this year is about whether hyperlink files should be discovered. And I added one new option to the choice this year,
do
to
tell.
the choices this year, which is basically yes, but only if the parties can come to an agreement, can negotiate an agreement on it. So here in a matter of a couple of weeks, we'll see what the respondents said in response to that question.
You also do a good job of, as always, linking to the full opinion here on Minerva 26, and Kelly Twigger, of course, from Minerva, also went through and gave some excellent insights into this case from her standpoint on there as well. So I'll make sure we have those links in the show notes. And then, as always, I know I've referenced this resource several times, but in the nextpoint.com blog, we sort of aggregated several of other discussions that Doug, you and I have had about hyperlinked files and discovery. And I feel like that this blog post, if you're still a little confused about what in the world that we're talking about, this is a great blog post to start with, and then you can dig a little bit deeper into some of your Doug's post on this as well. So the key discovery point today, I feel like, just make sure that you're weighing the burden versus benefits with hyperlinked files. I believe that this is the way that courts are going to continue to kind of navigate this issue and this question, but this is a good place to start. So as always, thanks, Doug. Yeah, go ahead.
You bet. Yeah, and continue to keep yourself informed on the challenges and the issues and the case law. So thanks, Brett, and thanks everybody.